He thought humiliating her would make the cabin laugh. But he had no idea he had just embarrassed the one woman on that aircraft who could change his entire career with a single phone call. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe people deserve respect no matter how they look, consider supporting stories like this. Now, back to Emma Whitmore. The Aurora Crown Flight 728 was not an ordinary flight. Parked at Gate 14 in the private terminal of JFK Airport, the aircraft gleamed beneath the soft lights of the hangar like something out of a billionaire's dream. A brand-new wide-body jet worth over $300 million, built for the elite who believed comfort should follow them even at 35,000 feet. Inside the cabin, champagne glasses rested in polished holders, Italian leather seats stretched wide enough to feel like living room recliners, and the quiet hum of pre-flight preparations echoed along the marble-patterned aisle floor. The passengers boarding that evening were the kind of people who wore success the way others wore jackets. A hedge fund manager from Connecticut discussing markets on his phone. A tech entrepreneur scrolling through emails worth millions. A well-known lifestyle influencer filming the glossy cabin with a bright smile, whispering to her camera about luxury travel experiences. Everyone looked exactly the way wealth was expected to look, which is why, when Emma Whitmore stepped into the cabin, a few heads quietly turned. She didn't look like the others. Her sweater was simple, soft gray cotton. Her shoes were comfortable walking flats, not designer heels. Over one shoulder, she carried a modest canvas tote bag that looked more suited for a farmer's market than a transatlantic luxury flight. She moved calmly down the aisle, glancing at the seat numbers with quiet patience, as if she had all the time in the world. At the front of the cabin stood Ryan Carter, the senior flight attendant for Aurora Airline's most prestigious routes. Ryan had worked luxury flights for nearly 15 years. He could recognize wealth at a glance, or at least he believed he could. Tailored suits, gold watches, confident strides. These were the signals he trusted. And as Emma approached seat 2A, Ryan's polite professional smile tightened just slightly. Because in his mind, something didn't add up. Seat 2A was not just another seat. It was the flagship seat of the cabin, reserved for Aurora's highest-tier clients and VIP guests. Ryan watched as Emma gently placed her tote bag beside the wide leather chair and began settling in, completely unaware of the silent calculation happening a few steps away. Around them, the quiet murmur of wealthy conversation continued, but curiosity began to spread through the first-class cabin like a ripple across still water. Ryan took a slow breath, straightened his jacket, and walked forward with the practiced confidence of someone who believed he was about to correct a very obvious mistake. Because in Ryan Carter's mind, passengers like Emma Whitmore didn't belong in seat 2A. And sometimes, the biggest mistakes in life begin with the smallest assumptions. Ryan Carter stopped beside seat 2A with the calm confidence of someone who had corrected hundreds of passengers before. Up close, he studied the woman again. The plain sweater, the canvas bag, the quiet way she sat, as if luxury cabins were not something she needed to admire. To Ryan, the situation seemed obvious. He placed his hands politely in front of him and spoke with a controlled professional tone that carried just far enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Excuse me, ma'am. I believe there may have been a small mistake during boarding." Emma Whitmore looked up slowly. Her expression was calm, her eyes steady, the kind of calm that did not rush to explain itself. "I do not think so," she said gently. Ryan offered a polite smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Seat 2A is part of our executive first-class section. Sometimes boarding passes are misread at the gate. If you would like, I can help you find your assigned seat in the main cabin." A faint murmur moved through the nearby rows. The hedge fund manager glanced up from his phone. The influencer quietly angled her camera toward the aisle, sensing the possibility of an awkward moment that might become entertaining content later. Emma reached into the pocket of her tote bag and calmly pulled out her boarding pass. She handed it to Ryan without a hint of irritation. Ryan glanced down quickly, expecting to confirm what he already believed. But instead of moving aside, he frowned slightly. Seat 2A. The printed letters were clear. Still, his mind resisted the conclusion. Boarding errors happened. Gate agents sometimes scanned the wrong pass. And appearances, in his experience, rarely lied. He looked back at Emma with a tighter smile. "Ma'am, There must have been a mix-up in the system. This seat is typically reserved for our premium loyalty guests and corporate partners. Emma tilted her head slightly. I understand, she replied softly, but this is the seat listed on my ticket. Ryan exhaled quietly and gestured toward the aisle. If you would not mind stepping out of the seat for just a moment, I can verify the reservation with our boarding system. It will only take a minute. His voice remained polite, but now it carried a hint of authority. A few passengers leaned subtly in their seats. Moments like this were rare in cabins where everything usually moved with polished perfection. Emma did not move right away. Instead, she folded her hands gently in her lap, thinking for a brief second. Then she spoke again in the same calm tone. I would prefer to remain seated unless there is proof that something is wrong. Ryan blinked once, surprised by the quiet firmness in her response. He was not used to resistance, especially from someone who looked so unassuming. Behind him, the influencer whispered to her phone camera, "This might get interesting." Ryan straightened his jacket again and reached for the tablet device clipped to his belt. "Very well, ma'am," he said. "Let us confirm the details." Because in Ryan Carter's mind, there was still only one possible explanation for what he was seeing. Somewhere, somehow, a mistake had been made, and he was certain the mistake was not his. Ryan Carter tapped quickly across the screen of his service tablet, the glow of the device reflecting faintly across the polished aisle floor. The aircraft cabin continued filling with the low hum of quiet conversations and the soft click of luggage compartments closing overhead, but attention was beginning to drift towards seat 2A. It always happened that way when something disrupted the carefully managed calm of first class. Ryan scanned the digital manifest, expecting the system to confirm what he already believed. Instead, the seat number appeared exactly as printed on the boarding pass. Seat 2A. Passenger name Emma Whitmore. Priority boarding verified. Ryan paused for a moment, his finger hovering above the screen. For a split second, he wondered if perhaps the reservation had been upgraded automatically by the airline loyalty system. That happened occasionally, but the name still did not fit the picture he had already formed in his mind. He cleared his throat and tried again, refreshing the manifest as if the information might change the second time. It did not. Emma Whitmore remained listed as the confirmed passenger. Ryan forced a polite expression back onto his face and looked up at her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I am still verifying your reservation. It may take a moment for our system to synchronize with the gate records." Emma nodded gently. "That is perfectly fine," she said, her voice calm and patient. Around them, curiosity continued to grow. The influencer in seat 3C subtly adjusted the angle of her phone, pretending to scroll while quietly recording the interaction. Across the aisle, the hedge fund manager lowered his newspaper slightly, his eyes watching over the top edge with quiet interest. Situations like this were rare entertainment during luxury travel. Ryan could feel the attention building behind him, and it made the situation feel slightly more urgent. The longer Emma remained in that seat, the more uncomfortable he felt about it. He tapped the tablet again, this time pulling up the detailed passenger profile attached to the reservation. The system loaded slowly for a moment, the spinning icon reflecting off the glossy screen. When the profile appeared, Ryan leaned closer. Passenger Emma Whitmore. Seat class executive first. Boarding group priority 1. No errors flagged. Ryan blinked once, then straightened. Something about the situation still felt wrong to him, even though the screen suggested otherwise. Sometimes travelers used purchased upgrades or travel agents to access seats like this. It did not always mean they belonged there permanently. He glanced again at Emma. She had folded her hands gently on her lap and was looking out the window beside her seat, watching the evening lights of the runway flicker in the distance. She did not appear embarrassed. She did not appear nervous. If anything, she seemed strangely unaffected by the entire exchange, as if the situation around her was nothing more than a minor delay in a long day. Ryan found that calm unsettling. Most passengers in this situation would already be arguing or explaining themselves. Emma did neither. Instead, she simply waited. Finally, Ryan spoke again, his voice slightly firmer than before. "Ma'am, I am going to confirm this with the boarding desk to make sure everything is correct before departure. It should only take another moment." Emma turned her head back toward him with the same steady expression. "Of course," she replied softly. "Take all the time you need." Ryan nodded once and stepped slightly into the aisle, raising the tablet to contact the gate system. Behind him, the quiet whispers in the cabin grew just a little louder, the atmosphere shifting from curiosity into anticipation. Because without realizing it, Ryan Carter had just turned a small misunderstanding into a moment the entire cabin was now watching. Ryan Carter stepped a few feet away from seat 2A, holding the tablet close as he initiated a quick verification through the gate support channel. The quiet chime of the aircraft systems blended with the low murmur of passengers settling into their seats, but now the atmosphere carried a subtle tension that had not been there earlier. Moments ago, the cabin had felt effortless, the kind of smooth luxury experience Aurora Airlines promised its highest-tier customers. Now that calm had been replaced by a thin layer of curiosity that seemed to hover in the air like static before a storm. Ryan spoke quietly into the headset attached to his collar, his voice low but controlled. Gate support. This is senior cabin crew on Crown Flight 728. I need confirmation on a first-class boarding pass. Seat 2 Alpha. Passenger name Emma Whitmore. There was a brief pause before the reply came through the line, distorted slightly by the headset speaker. Copy that. Checking now. Ryan waited, glancing briefly back toward the seat. Emma Whitmore remained exactly where she had been, her posture relaxed, her gaze drifting back toward the window as the golden lights of the runway reflected against the aircraft wing outside. She did not look worried. She did not look impatient. If anything, she looked as though this small delay was simply another ordinary moment in her day. That calmness bothered Ryan more than he expected. Across the aisle, the hedge fund manager had now fully lowered his newspaper, pretending to read an article while clearly watching the scene unfold. The influencer in seat 3C quietly adjusted her phone again, whispering something to her audience about unexpected drama during luxury boarding. Ryan turned slightly away from the cabin and focused on the voice. Returning through his headset. The gate system shows the reservation as valid, the voice reported. Seat 2 Alpha confirmed under Emma Whitmore. Boarding scan was successful at 17:43. Ryan frowned slightly. Are there any upgrade notes attached to the ticket? Another pause followed while the system was checked again. Negative. Full executive class fare. Reservation issued directly through corporate booking. Ryan blinked once. Corporate booking was unusual. Those reservations were normally arranged by major business accounts or airline partners. Still, it did not fully explain the situation in front of him. Ryan thanked the gate operator and ended the connection, lowering the tablet slowly. When he turned back toward the cabin, he could feel several passengers watching more openly now. The moment had stretched long enough to become its own quiet spectacle. Ryan stepped back toward seat 2 Alpha, maintaining the same professional posture he had practiced through years of service. Emma noticed him approach and looked up calmly, as if she already knew exactly what he was going to say next. Ryan gave a measured smile. Ma'am, I have confirmed that your boarding pass is active in the system. However, I would still like to verify one final detail before departure, just to ensure that everything is completely correct. Emma studied his expression for a brief moment, then nodded gently. That is fine, she said softly. Ryan hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before continuing. Because the truth was, the reservation had already been confirmed twice. Yet something in his instincts still insisted that the situation did not make sense. And sometimes when people trust their assumptions more than the evidence in front of them, they unknowingly step deeper into a mistake that will soon become impossible to ignore. Ryan Carter stood beside seat 2 Alpha for another moment, the polite smile on his face beginning to feel heavier than before. The reservation had already been confirmed twice, yet the quiet certainty inside his mind refused to settle. Around him, the cabin lights glowed softly against the leather seats and polished surfaces, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations had lowered to softer tones. Curiosity now floated through the first-class cabin like a silent observer. Emma Whitmore remained seated calmly, her hands folded loosely in her lap as if none of the attention around her truly mattered. Ryan cleared his throat and adjusted the tablet. In his hand. Ma'am, he said carefully, there is simply one last detail I would like to verify before we finalize boarding. Sometimes executive reservations are issued under special corporate agreements, and we occasionally confirm those directly with operations. Emma looked at him quietly, her expression still patient. If that helps, you are welcome to do so, she replied. Ryan nodded once, though inside he felt a small flicker of irritation that he could not quite explain. Most passengers in this situation would have become defensive or embarrassed by now. Emma showed neither reaction. Instead, she simply waited, calm and steady, as if she knew time was working in her favor. Ryan stepped slightly aside again, pretending to focus on his tablet while considering his next move. He opened the passenger profile once more, studying the details more carefully this time. The reservation had been purchased directly through Aurora Airlines corporate booking. The fare class was not upgraded. It was full executive class. The system also showed priority service flags usually reserved for corporate ownership accounts and executive partnerships. Ryan frowned slightly. That category rarely appeared on flights like this unless the traveler was connected to someone very high inside the company. He glanced again toward Emma. She had reached into her tote bag and quietly pulled out her phone. The movement was calm and unhurried. She unlocked the screen, read something briefly, then typed a short message with a few simple taps of her fingers. Ryan noticed the action but paid little attention to it. Passengers texted all the time before departure. Emma finished typing and looked at the screen for a moment before pressing send. The message itself was only a few words long. I think your crew may need a little training tonight. She slipped the phone back into her bag without any sign of frustration. To the other passengers watching quietly, it looked like an ordinary message sent during a delayed boarding moment. Ryan, however, had already turned his attention back to the reservation system, unaware that the message had just been delivered to someone whose name was printed on every aircraft flying under Aurora Airlines. A few rows back, the influencer whispered softly to her phone camera again, describing the unusual tension that had settled across the cabin. The hedge fund manager now watched openly, his newspaper folded neatly on the tray beside him. Even a few flight attendants further down the aisle had begun exchanging quiet glances. Ryan finally lowered the tablet again and stepped toward Emma once more, determined to bring the situation to a close. Ma'am, he began, maintaining the same professional tone, I appreciate your patience. We will resolve this shortly. Emma met his eyes calmly. Of course, she said. Her voice carried the same quiet confidence it had from the beginning. But what Ryan Carter did not know, and what no one in the cabin could possibly realize yet, was that somewhere far beyond the runway lights outside the aircraft window, a phone had just lit up with Emma Whitmore's message. And the man reading it was not just another passenger. 30 minutes before departure, far above the quiet glow of the runway lights, the operations floor inside Aurora Airlines headquarters was still alive with activity. The building overlooked the Hudson River, its glass walls reflecting the soft orange of the late evening sky. Inside the executive operations office, screens displayed dozens of aircraft routes moving across digital maps, each flight carefully tracked as it prepared for departure across the country. At the center of the room sat Jonathan Whitmore, the man whose name had quietly shaped the entire airline. He had built Aurora Airlines from a modest regional carrier into one of the most respected luxury aviation brands in the United States. His leadership style was known for two things above all else: precision and respect. The company had grown on a simple philosophy he repeated often during leadership meetings. Luxury is not about marble floors or leather seats. It is about how people are treated when nobody is watching. Jonathan was reviewing a report on aircraft maintenance scheduling when his phone vibrated softly against the polished desk. The notification appeared with a familiar name that immediately caught his attention. Emma Whitmore. His expression softened slightly as he picked up the phone. Emma rarely texted during travel unless something unusual had happened. He opened the message and read the short line that appeared on the screen. I think your crew may need a little training tonight. Jonathan leaned back in his chair slowly. Anyone who knew him well would have recognized the change in his expression immediately. The calm businessman who normally spoke in measured tones had just become very interested in something happening far away from that office. He tapped the message again and looked at the flight information attached to Emma's travel itinerary. Crown Flight 728. Scheduled departure from New York to Paris. Executive class service. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. Instead, he reached calmly for the direct operations phone sitting beside his desk. When the line connected, the operations manager answered immediately. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. Jonathan spoke with the quiet control that had guided the company for decades. I would like you to contact the cockpit of Crown Flight 728 immediately. There was a brief pause on the line as the manager processed the request. Yes, sir, the manager replied. May I ask if there is a technical concern with the flight? Jonathan looked once more at Emma's message before answering. No technical concern, he said calmly. Just a service situation that I would like addressed before that aircraft leaves the gate. Within seconds, the operations team began routing the request through the airline communication network. A signal was sent to the aircraft preparing for departure at JFK Airport. In the cockpit of Crown Flight 728, the pilots were running through the final pre-flight checklists when a notification appeared on the communication panel beside them. Incoming operations call. The captain glanced at the display, slightly puzzled. Direct calls from headquarters during boarding were rare unless something important required immediate attention. He pressed the connection switch. Crown Flight 728 cockpit, he answered. Operations control responded almost instantly. Captain, we have received a direct request from executive leadership regarding a passenger situation in your first-class cabin. The captain exchanged a quick look with the first officer before replying. Understood. What kind of situation? The voice on the line answered carefully. It concerns passenger Emma Whitmore seated in 2 Alpha. For the first time that evening, the cockpit grew completely quiet. The cockpit of Crown Flight 728 fell into a brief and unusual silence after the name was spoken. Captain Daniel Reeves stared at the communication panel for a moment, making sure he had heard correctly. Emma Whitmore. The name was not unfamiliar to him. Anyone who had spent enough time flying for Aurora Airlines eventually learned the name Whitmore carried a particular weight inside the company. He adjusted the headset over his ear and spoke carefully. Operations, please confirm. The nature of the concern regarding passenger Whitmore in seat 2 Alpha. The voice from headquarters responded with the same measured tone used for situations that required absolute clarity. Captain, the request is coming directly from Mr. Jonathan Whitmore. He would like you to ensure that Mrs. Whitmore is being treated appropriately during boarding. The first officer slowly turned in his seat, raising his eyebrows in quiet surprise. Captain Reeves leaned back slightly, processing the information. Jonathan Whitmore did not personally intervene in routine flight matters. When he did, it meant something had already gone wrong. Understood, the captain replied calmly. We will address it immediately. Thank you. Operations answered before the line disconnected. For a second, the cockpit remained quiet except for the soft hum of avionics systems and the distant sound of ground crew vehicles moving outside the aircraft. The first officer finally spoke. Did they say Mrs. Whitmore? The captain nodded once. Yes, he said quietly. They did. Down in the first-class cabin, Ryan Carter was still standing near seat 2 Alpha, maintaining the same professional posture he had held throughout the entire exchange. The situation had stretched longer than he expected, but he remained convinced he was simply finishing the final steps of verification before departure. Emma Whitmore sat calmly in her seat, the soft cabin lighting reflecting gently across the window beside her. Around them, several passengers were still watching with quiet interest, waiting to see how the unusual moment would resolve. Suddenly, a chime sounded from the intercom panel near the front galley. One of the junior flight attendants glanced at it before looking toward Ryan. Ryan, the cockpit is requesting you on the flight deck, she said softly. Ryan frowned slightly. The cockpit almost never called cabin crew during routine boarding unless there was a safety concern or an operational question. He nodded and straightened his jacket again. I will be right back, he told Emma with the same polite tone he had used before. It will only take a moment. Emma simply nodded once. Of course, she replied calmly. Ryan walked toward the front of the aircraft, the quiet murmur of the cabin fading behind him as he approached the reinforced cockpit door. He entered after the captain granted access and stepped inside the small flight deck. Captain Reeves turned slightly in his seat, studying Ryan for a brief second before speaking. Ryan, we just received a direct communication from Aurora Operations Headquarters. Ryan blinked in surprise. Headquarters, he repeated. Yes, the captain said evenly. It concerns the passenger you have been verifying in seat 2 Alpha. Ryan felt a small knot form in his stomach as the captain continued. Her name is Emma Whitmore. Ryan nodded slowly. That is correct. The captain paused for a moment before finishing the sentence that would change the entire situation in the cabin. Ryan, The message came from Jonathan Whitmore himself. Ryan's expression froze as the captain added one final detail. And Emma Whitmore is his wife. Ryan Carter stood frozen in the cockpit for a brief moment after the captain finished speaking. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. Jonathan Whitmore. His wife. Ryan felt as if the small flight deck had suddenly become much smaller. For years he had worked for Aurora Airlines, serving executives, celebrities, and wealthy travelers who expected perfection in every detail of their journey. But never once had he found himself in a situation like this. Captain Reeves watched him carefully, his voice calm but firm. Ryan, headquarters wants confirmation that Mrs. Whitmore is comfortable and properly seated. Ryan swallowed once before answering. Yes, Captain. She is currently seated in 2 Alpha. I was only verifying the reservation. The captain gave a slow nod. That verification is complete. The message from Mr. Whitmore was very clear. He expects his wife to be treated like any other passenger who has purchased a seat in this cabin. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly, the realization settling deeper with each passing second. The entire situation suddenly looked very different from the perspective of the cockpit. What he had believed was a simple mistake now felt like something else entirely. Captain Reeves leaned slightly closer, his voice quieter but more serious. Ryan, this flight represents the highest service standard of this airline. If the owner of the company felt the need to call operations during boarding, it means something already reached his attention. Ryan nodded slowly. Understood, Captain. You may return to the cabin, the captain said. And I recommend resolving the situation immediately. Ryan took a breath, straightened his jacket once more, and stepped out of the cockpit. The door closed softly behind him as he walked back toward the first-class cabin. The short hallway suddenly felt much longer than before. Each step carried the growing awareness that every decision he had made in the last 15 minutes was now impossible to undo. When Ryan stepped back into the cabin, the quiet atmosphere had not changed. Passengers were still seated comfortably beneath the soft lighting, though many of them glanced toward him as he returned. The influencer lowered her phone slightly, but continued watching. The hedge fund manager leaned back in his seat with clear curiosity. Emma Whitmore remained exactly where she had been from the beginning, seated calmly in 2 Alpha with her hands resting lightly on the armrests. She looked up as Ryan approached. Her expression had not changed. There was no frustration in her eyes, no satisfaction, no impatience. Just the same quiet composure that had been there from the start. Ryan stopped beside her seat, and for the first time since boarding began, he did not immediately speak. The silence around them seemed to grow heavier as nearby passengers subtly listened. Finally, Ryan lowered his voice. Mrs. Whitmore, he said respectfully, I would like to apologize for the confusion earlier. Your seat assignment is completely correct, and you are absolutely welcome to remain here for the duration of the flight. Emma looked at him for a moment, studying his expression carefully. Then she gave a small, polite nod. Thank you, she replied gently. Ryan stood there for another second before stepping back into the aisle. The cabin returned to its quiet rhythm of pre-flight preparation, but something had clearly shifted in the air. Because now the entire first-class cabin understood something Ryan Carter had only just discovered. The woman he had questioned from the beginning had never been in the wrong seat at all. The cabin of Crown Flight 728 slowly returned to its quiet rhythm after Ryan Carter stepped back from seat 2 Alpha. The overhead bins were now closed. The soft lighting along the aisle glowed warmly against the polished interior, and the low murmur of passengers settling into their seats filled the space once again. Yet something subtle had changed in the atmosphere. Moments earlier the cabin had been watching a small moment of uncertainty unfold. Now the tension had been replaced by a quiet understanding that spread from one seat to another without a single word being spoken. Emma Whitmore remained seated calmly. Beside the window, her gaze drifting briefly toward the wing of the aircraft where ground lights shimmered against the evening air. She showed no sign of triumph, no satisfaction in the sudden shift of tone around her. To anyone watching closely, she simply looked like a traveler preparing for a long flight across the Atlantic. Ryan Carter continued down the aisle, checking overhead compartments and tray tables with the practiced routine of an experienced senior attendant, but his movements carried a new level of care. The confident certainty he had shown earlier had been replaced with quiet focus. Every step now reminded him of the moment inside the cockpit when the captain had spoken the name Jonathan Whitmore. For years Ryan had worked under the values that defined Aurora Airlines. But in the rush of routine judgment, he had forgotten the simplest principle the company was built upon. Respect was never supposed to depend on appearances. Across the aisle, the hedge fund manager leaned back comfortably, his expression thoughtful as he watched the final moments of boarding. Even the influencer who had quietly recorded the earlier exchange lowered her phone and glanced once more toward seat 2 Alpha with a look of quiet reflection. Emma reached into her tote bag again and removed a small book, opening it gently, as if the entire episode had already faded into the background of her evening. Ryan eventually returned to the front galley and paused there for a moment, watching the first-class cabin with a different perspective than before. He took a slow breath before stepping back toward Emma one final time. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, his voice sincere, "I would like to personally thank you for your patience earlier." Emma closed her book and looked up at him with the same calm expression she had carried throughout the entire situation. Ryan continued carefully, "We strive to provide excellent service to every passenger on this aircraft. Today I was reminded how important that truly is." Emma studied him for a brief moment before responding. Her voice was gentle, but the meaning behind her words carried quietly across the space between them. "Everyone deserves respect the moment they walk through the door," she said softly. "Not after someone discovers who they are." Ryan nodded slowly, understanding the weight of that sentence. A soft announcement echoed through the cabin speakers as the captain welcomed passengers aboard and informed them that departure would begin shortly. Outside the window, the aircraft began to push back from the gate, its massive wings turning slowly toward the runway lights stretching across the airport. Emma returned to her book, the calm traveler she had been from the beginning. And somewhere high above the clouds, as Crown Flight 728 prepared to cross the Atlantic, a quiet lesson remained behind in the first-class cabin. Sometimes the greatest mistake a person can make is believing they can measure someone's worth with a single glance.